It's biology with Mr. B. Biology with Mr. B. That's me! Hello, welcome to a GCSE revision video about the topic circulation and health from paper 1 of the AQA specification. So there's quite a few things I could go into if I had all the time in the world, but I'm going to try and stick to 20 minutes. Lungs. That's where lungs come up. There's actually not a lot of detail regarding lungs in the spec points, but we could talk about ventilation and how the muscles involved in the lungs affect the volume, which affect the pressure gradients, which affect air moving in and out. Gas exchange, which is a really nice link to diffusion and adaptations for diffusion and exchange surfaces. We could talk about blood, so the different components of blood and what they do. That includes white blood cells and the immune system. Different blood vessels and the comparisons you can make between the three different blood vessels. The heart as an actual organ, so structurally labelled and generally as a pump. Double circulatory system actually is, and why that's efficient for mammals, but maybe why other organisms don't need a double circulatory pump. And then all things non-communicable disease were taught within this singular topic, but there's a lot of things you could go into. And in all fairness, it's the past paper questions that will do that the most justice, especially all the sort of 6-mark evaluate style questions that have been. So in the time that I've got available, I'm really going to cherry pick and focus where I've seen the majority of marks and the majority of key ideas come up in my experience as an examiner over the last few years. So, start off. I will start off with an idea to do with the lungs, but I'm going to start, it's not going to be with ventilation or general lung structure, it's going to be really focused on the alveoli. So the alveoli, the site of gas exchange, the site of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange between the lungs and the blood. So that blue shape there, that is my air sac, that is my alveoli. Let's give it a label. And the alveoli has a wall made of cells. I'm going to try and draw this wall incredibly thinly, except for the bits where where my hand went a bit silly. So this has a really thin wall of cells. They're called epithelial cells. Squamous epithelial, if you want to be really specific. Squamous means squashed, that's important. I also want to draw a blood vessel, a capillary. So I'm drawing it right next to the alveoli. Now capillaries as well, by the way, they are made, their outside wall is a layer of cells. Again, I'm very deliberately drawing this as thin as I can. Layer of cells. Same for this side. Layer of cells. And inside that blood vessel, obviously there'd be red blood cells throughout, squashed up against the walls of the capillary, because capillaries are so small that you can only fit one red blood cell through at a time. I know. Right, so terrible diagrams aside, let's just have a little zoom through. We know that because of ventilation, air will be constantly moving in and moving out. Yet we also know that, think about oxygen concentrations, the air that comes in, the oxygen concentration is about 21%. Yet the air that goes out, the oxygen concentration is down to 16. That shows us, that proves to us that oxygen must be taken in by the body and used by the body. And we know that for aerobic respiration. Likewise, if I focus on carbon dioxide, we know that the air that we breathe in has about 0.04%, yet the air we breathe out has closer to 4%. So clearly we're not necessarily using CO2, but we're certainly releasing it and ventilating it out. Because we can link that to aerobic respiration. It's a product of aerobic respiration, so we make it and then we excrete it by breathing out. Now our alveoli as a surface, and the capillaries as well, they are massively adapted to maximise oxygen moving into the blood and carbon dioxide moving out. And there are 3 key adaptations. The first, alveoli have a huge surface area. I mean huge. So the way I've written large there sort of set me. Gigantic surface area compared to if they didn't have this sort of bubbling effect. So this large surface area is going to make sure that we increase rate of diffusion. And of course, guys, that's the rate of oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusion. Oxygen in, CO2 out. The second adaptation, both the capillary and the alveoli have really, really thin walls. They're not thin cell walls. No, it's animal, doesn't have cell walls. But it does have a wall made of cells. So it does have really, really thin walls. And what that's doing, it's reducing the diffusion distance. So there's less distance for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to travel. The final thing this alveoli is doing, the fact that we are constantly ventilating and the fact that we have a really, really good blood supply, it means we are able to continually maintain a steep concentration gradient. So for all the oxygen that comes in, as it diffuses into the blood takes the oxygen away. So the blood that is interacting with the alveoli always has 0 oxygen. And therefore there's always a steep concentration gradient allowing the oxygen to diffuse into the blood. And vice versa for carbon dioxide moving out. Every time you breathe out, the CO2 gets taken away. So there's only, 0.04% CO2 at any point inside here, which means there's always a steep concentration gradient, higher in the blood and low in the alveoli. This is a diffusion idea, and these 3 ideas are perfect adaptations of all exchange surfaces, and that includes the villi within the small intestine. Okay. So next up, let's look at blood in a bit more detail. So the components of blood you've got your red blood cells, you've got your white blood cells, you've got your platelets, and you've got your blood plasma. So I'll start with plasma, might be at the bottom, but it's a good one to start with. The plasma is the fluid part of the blood, and it contains dissolved chemicals. For example, in the plasma there will be dissolved within, there will be glucose, amino acids from digestion, fatty acids, glycerol. There will be some carbon dioxide, urea, some of these waste products being hopefully going to be excreted. Hormones travel in the blood. Antibodies from the immune system travel dissolved in that blood plasma. Now these 3, these are large components. They won't be dissolved in the plasma, they're too big, but they will be floating. We would call it a suspension, and these would be the large things floating within that suspension. Now all 3 of these, by the way, are made from the same stem cells in your bone marrow, but as those stem cells differentiate, they can differentiate into the 3 different parts. So platelets, bless them, they're not really a type of cell. They're kind of like it's like they're going to become a cell and then sort of stop differentiating halfway through, so you're left with like a mangled mess of protein. But they're absolutely fantastic at blood clotting. So platelets are for clotting the blood. Really good thing to happen, isn't it, for that sort of defense mechanism against pathogens. White blood cells, again, the white blood cells, they are your immune system. Lymphocytes, phagocytes, we can look at that when we do the communicable disease topic. Red blood cells are the ones to look at now. A general function of a red blood cell is to transport oxygen around the body. And it does that because it contains the red pigment hemoglobin. And hemoglobin can bind to oxygen. So I just want to focus on this red blood cell idea. And I want to link it to respiration and energy. The key idea of all paper one, energy. A question that could come up, like a high level grade 7, 8, 9 question that could come up to try and separate those who really understand what they've learned and those who have just tried to learn words, could be something along the lines of, why do sporting people train at high altitude before events? Well, you may or may not know, but at high altitude there is less oxygen in the air. And what your body does, your body responds to that. If there's less oxygen, it needs to maximise what it can transport, and therefore it will actually produce more red blood cells. And more red blood cells means there's going to be more hemoglobin. More hemoglobin would mean more oxygen transported to muscle cells, wouldn't it, per second, as a rate. The more oxygen transported means those cells will be able to do more aerobic respiration, which means they'll be able to release more energy. More energy to contract those muscles. So why does a sports star train at high altitudes? So their body produces more red blood cells to combat the lack of oxygen in the air, which means they have more hemoglobin when they return down to low altitudes. So they're able to transport more oxygen per second to those muscle cells, more aerobic respiration, more energy release, more muscle contractions. The athlete wins the race. This energy link is everywhere, and with the circulation topic is perfect to link to respiration and to link to energy. And can you see how this simple idea of, oh, they'll have more oxygen, becomes a 6 marker if you put the links in about all things respiration, energy, muscles, and so on. Okay, next one. So I thought next I'd look at quite a classic idea of blood vessel comparisons. So it's not the most challenging idea, but the slight skill-based question of a comparison does throw students. So if I draw the 3 blood vessels really, really simply, there's my 3 blood vessels. I've drawn the artery. That sound there, by the way, is my cat coming in through the cat flap. Hello, hello Binks. Nice to see you. So artery, vein, and this teeny tiny one is a cute little capillary. So capillaries are diffusion kings. They're teeny, they're tiny, and that's just to maximise the amount of diffusion that can take place. It's arteries and veins that you generally get asked to compare. So even structurally, you can see structurally there's some real key differences. The lumen, which is the hole in the middle, arteries have a smaller lumen. But they also have a thicker wall as a result. So although you definitely get credit for saying it has a thicker wall, please bear in mind in your spec you should appreciate that wall is made of muscle and elastic fibres. So what you're really saying is the wall is more muscular and it has more elastic fibres compared to a vein. The other difference that students don't really tend to get structurally is they forget that veins have valves. But if you want to make it a comparison, you then have to say arteries do not. It's very easy in an exam to say like arteries have a smaller lumen, and that's good, that is a comparison because you've used the word, smaller. But you can't say veins have valves. That's not a comparison, that's not a word. You have to say arteries do not to guarantee yourself that you get that credit. There are, of course, other comparisons. We can make functional comparisons that arteries take blood away from the heart. They have a thicker wall, because they're under higher pressure, and the thicker wall means they are less likely to burst. The smaller lumen maintains that high pressure, and that allows the oxygenated blood coming from the heart to get to those muscle cells as quickly as possible, because it keeps the pressure high, keeps the blood flowing quickly. Valves, by the way, veins have valves. Oh, get that confused. Veins have valves. They do that to prevent backflow of blood because they are under low pressure and therefore the blood might not be inclined to flow the correct way back to the heart. So the valve is there to stop that blood going the wrong way. So the blood only ever moves back towards the heart. So arteries away and veins go back toward. And capillaries are the diffusion kings. Okie dokie. So, alright, what we're going to focus on next. So, controversially maybe, I'm not going to draw out a heart and label it. I'm actually going to focus on the idea of a double circulatory system. I think that's going to be the bigger idea to understand here. So mammals have a double circulatory system. And what that means is, every time the blood goes around the body in one whole circuit, it flows through the heart twice. So blood will go to the lungs, and then it will go back to the heart. Blood will then go out the heart to the body, and then it will go back to the heart once again. So double circulatory system. For every circuit around the body, the blood flows through the heart twice. What that means is, and this is why it's really efficient for humans, for mammals. Mammals and birds, for that matter, we are warm-blooded, which means we need to respire constantly just to release enough energy to keep us at 37 degrees, really warm temperature. So even if you're sleeping, even if you're being really lazy, you're still respiring a huge amount, and you need a huge amount of energy. You need a lot of oxygen still getting to your cells and to your muscles, to your organs, to your tissues. So blood will obviously go to the lungs, and inevitably it has to do that to pick up oxygen. But what actually that means is, as the blood is flowing out flowing through the artery to the lungs. When it gets to the lungs, the blood will be in capillaries and the pressure will have been lost. So if the blood then went straight to the body, the blood would have zero pressure and it would travel really slowly, too slow to meet our metabolic demands. But because it flows back to the heart can then pump it one more time, allowing it to increase the pressure, increase the speed, and get to the body cells that need the oxygen for aerobic respiration to meet our metabolic demand. So a double circulatory system ensures blood is at a suitable pressure to meet our metabolic demands, which we are warm-blooded, so we have really high metabolic demands to do with energy. So if I was to compare that to a fish that has a single circulatory system, if I just draw it really small, so lungs, body. So the fish's blood goes to the lungs under high pressure. The capillaries of the lungs reduce the pressure down to naught. The blood flows incredibly slowly, really low pressure to the body cells, and then really low pressure again back to the heart to be pumped one more time. This single circulatory system will not work in mammals and birds. Because we are warm-blooded, this will not deliver the oxygenated blood to the body cells quick enough to allow our metabolic demands to be met. It works for fish. Fish are cold-blooded. Fish don't have to respire constantly to maintain their internal temperature. So they don't need as much oxygen getting to their body cells per second. So even though this is a less efficient means of transport, it's perfectly fine for a fish. It's perfectly fine for an amphibian. It's perfectly fine for whichever type of cold-blooded organism I've not mentioned. Fish and reptile. There you go. Reptile. You're welcome. Right, so I think my brain's clearly gone. I'm 23 minutes in, so that's definitely time. So I'm sorry that's all I could get through in the time available. There's plenty more. Please use my revision booklet to help you out with those bits I've not gone through. And when you're doing the questions, pay attention to the non-communicable disease stuff, the evaluate stuff. There's a lot of skill base involved. Really look at those mark schemes. They're really, really useful. So thank you very, very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.